those in themselves were fantastic technology.
Describe the interior, what it looks like.
It's very, very bland. If I, again, was to give you an analogy, I would say it was if you put all these components in there, pretended everything was made out of wax, heat it up for a bit and let it cool off. There was never a sharp angle anywhere. Anytime something sat somewhere perpendicular to it, it had a radius or curvature to it. Everything had a smooth curve everywhere. It was all one color.
Was it all one piece?
It looks like it was one giant inject and molded thing, but there was not a seam, there was not a rivet, there was not a fastener. It was just all there.
Any buttons? Any no place to put in the key? And
no, and there's no wiring.
You mentioned about, I'll use the term, furniture, because you got a lot. We both got a lot of grief.
Furniture, yeah. Well, that was because this was, I think, the first interview on TV, and I was frightened for a couple of reasons. First of all, I wasn't supposed to be saying anything, and the fact that it was on TV, and I didn't know what kind of big mistake this was. And so you asked me what was inside or describe, and I was trying to think of the word seats, and I couldn't in a million years get that out of my mind, and all I could say is there's furniture in there. And I know it sounded ridiculous, and everybody said, well, that guy can't be a scientist. He doesn't even know what the word seat is in. It's just stress does that to you.
It was the size of it, though. It was small.
Yeah, it was, yeah. Furniture. Well, yeah, that's quite a critical point. Everything was very small. It looked like, well, maybe that's where it popped into my mind, because I was thinking of, the children's, furniture set or tea set you get for little kids that have, the little molded chairs and little tiny, but that's exactly what it looked like. It looked like a little furniture set for kids. So, and obviously it was uncomfortable to walk around in. When you first come in the side, you have to hunch over. The only place you can stand up comfortably is, right by the reactor in the side. So whatever built or used the thing was obviously smaller than my stature.
I'll come back to the term the kids a little bit later. So somebody did the test. Somebody was in it. They must have figured out a little bit of how it operates.
Yeah, obviously, and in the sport model, the one that I went in, they removed one of the amplifiers, which was really shocking to me. Now, the reactor and emitter, all those were in that one, so that must have come from another craft, which made me at least partially to believe that these all may have the same power systems in them, which, really makes you think that's...
So the one you had in the lab that you were working with...
Yeah, the components had to come from somewhere else.
Same one that was in the sport model.
Yeah, but wasn't the sport models. So, you can extrapolate and say...
They all like them.
Yeah, it's kind of like a Chevy. They all have the same kind of engine and they're different, but I don't know, it's all conjecture.
Let's talk about the fuel. So big, it's an interesting part of the story and a bone of contention for a lot of folks. Element 115. How did you know it was 115? Describe its properties.
Describe its properties?
Why, what does it do? Why is it so miraculous?
Well, let me put it this way. We weren't given the task to say, analyze the fuel, find out what it is, and, they just, again, the thing was, and there was a lot of push to it, was to, what is that, and do we have any? And, that's it. And these guys really do talk and think like that. It's just, what did you guys do today? We just looked at this the other day. But, if you remove the top of the reactor, there's a little tower in there with a cap, and there's a triangular piece of fuel in there, what we called the fuel, because if you put that in, everything starts to work. We analyzed what was there. Now, somehow, again, we didn't have access to all the information, but somehow Los Alamos had something to do with either keeping or storing the fuel. Now, we did all kinds of tests on it, not just us. We had to send, all that equipment isn't there. We don't have, all kinds of interesting spectrographs. But we had it tested, and we just wanted to see where this was on the periodic chart, what kind of peaks we get off of it, And, maybe it's just, a unique fuel, maybe it's just some, a blend of a nuclear material. But when it became obvious that this isn't even on our usable periodic chart, that's essentially where we stopped, and said we weren't going to analyze the material and see if we could make it. We just wanted to know if it was something that we could possibly use, and it wasn't.
You told me that we couldn't make it. Why couldn't we make it?
Well, just like any heavy element or super heavy element, more specifically, the only naturally occurring heavy element's uranium. I mean, as soon as you get anything heavier than that, a larger number of protons, you have to make artificially. And that's a difficult job, because you either, like to make plutonium, which our country loves, you have to take other materials, put them in a reactor, let it run for a couple of years, and then you can, in the case of plutonium, you can chemically separate out, the small quantity of that. Now, even heavier elements, there's more difficulty obtaining. Extremely heavy ones, like 110, you have to make that on an atom by atom basis, an accelerator where you're, accelerating single atoms or beams of other atoms, near the speed of light, smacking them together, and it doesn't make a usable quantity. I mean, you may get the interaction you want, and it flies off and hits a detector, at a fraction of the speed of light, and you go, that was 115. And, that's when they say, we synthesize 115, that's what it is. It's not like a cup pops out and we've got some, It's just, a particle comes flying out, and we go, well, at these angles, at this magnetic moment, at that speed, it will be 115. And if you get a peek at that, boom, it comes off. It's a little display on a thing, and right, we made 115. But, to actually make usable quantities, forget it. It would take, the entire resources of a country forever, to get a gram or so.
How much was up there?
Well, they say there was 500 pounds of the material. Now, was that recovered in a craft? Was that separate? They certainly didn't synthesize it, but, where it came from, I have no idea. But again, Los Alamos had something to do with it, because they renamed it LA 1000. I know there are shipments back and forth there, but I think it had to be, from what I understand, it had to, if you assume a cylinder of this material, it has to be machined into a cone, and that cone sliced, it has to be stacked first, like a bunch of quarters stacked on top of one another, then machined into a cone, and then sliced to be usable in the reactor. Now, all of that had to do with the metallurgical guys, and we weren't even allowed to know why, but I knew that was necessary for whatever it's worth.
Reactor doesn't work without 115. Did you ever do an experiment to try some other kind of fuel?
No.
Okay.
I mean, quite honestly, we really didn't know what was going on there. I mean, we had a basic idea of, at least we thought. Again, we just had to report to what was going on, so it's not like you can ever say, we really don't know. We've been working on this 2 weeks. You better come up with something. So it's, look, we think it's an accelerator, and we've identified that that's 114, 115, 160. It looks like it's 115. It's an element, and you have to explain this stuff to guys that absolutely have minimal scientific background, and just try that when you're dealing with stuff that's not even, from the earth.
So how does it work? I mean, how does it work? What you learned, you get a piece of it, a triangle. It's in, and how does it? What function?
Really, you just put the. I wish I had that model that.
It's in my car.
Show me. Is it really? Okay. You just put the fuel in there. There's a little cap that sits on top, and then as soon as you yet nothing happens, but as soon as you put the lid on, it turns on. There's no on switch. Yeah, it's like it attains resonance or something. It just is on. Which makes you wonder, how does it work in the craft? Because no one's taken the lid off, because in the craft, it sits on the ground, and there's a conduit that sits over it and goes to the top of the craft. So, but it's not clear how anything works in the craft.
And it generates gravity.
Oh yeah,
Creates.
Yeah. It generates its own artificial gravitational field, and that lifts the craft off the ground.
We've had conversations in private about how this accounts for some UFO cases. I mean, it in effect achieves invisibility in a sense. You can be standing right next to
Oh,
it.
yeah, absolutely, yeah, because light, it will bend it around there, and sorry, I didn't leave that, I left out that pretty important observation. When the craft was up, I mean, you could walk underneath and look straight up, and you can't see the craft until you step to the side, and it becomes visible again. It's quite amazing, you know. So it bends light, just like you know, you could see on a hot roadway in the summertime how heat would affect that coming off of, you know. But here you're in a much more controlled situation, and the shape of the gravitational field, the artificial field around the craft, if you look at that and then we're able to stand at different vantage points, you can just look around it. Now, this isn't something new. We know this from, you know, looking at faraway stars. They call it gravitational lensing, where a star might be over here, but because we're looking around another star, it bends light, and, you know, but here again, here is an artificial source, a machine that does this, and that's everything. But yeah, like I said, all the science fiction things become reality. There's your invisibility cloak, there's your, you know, impenetrable force field, here's your field propulsion system, and, you know, here's you're even beginning to tamper with, you know, potential time travel.
It occurs to you, hey, this could work not only in space but underwater. Maybe that's why the Navy's interested in running the program. I mean, it's odd, isn't it, that it's the U.S. Navy running the program out there?
You know, that never occurred to me. No, I swear to this, I never even thought about that thing operating underwater.
It would work just fine, though, wouldn't it?
I guess. I don't know. I mean, yeah, I don't understand why it wouldn't, but it'd be interesting to see what the water does.
You had said, I remember, I could barely get my pointy little head around it when we were first talking about this, but that if somebody had one of these and were out in space and wanted to come to Earth, in essence, they're not propelling themselves toward Earth. It works differently, right?
Yeah. In fact, the two modes that the craft operated on are, they labeled Delta and Omicron configuration. Delta meaning using all three amplifiers, and Omicron obviously meaning just one. And the way the craft would work is, let me get rid of my reactor here. Now I'm going to draw a really bad flying saucer here. All right, so normally you would have the three amplifiers hanging, or the three emitters hanging down. In Omicron mode, a single one would swing sideways, and you would have the other two sitting like that. Now, what happens is the two that are facing straight down essentially act like a pedestal where they just keep the craft steady. The one swung out to the side creates a gravitational distortion off the edge. And these, in Omicron configuration, these things really fly unstable. They do not look like any sort of high-tech technology. To give you an example, if you put a bowling ball in the middle of your bed, and 2 feet away you take your fist and you push it down, the bowling ball rolls towards it. And that's exactly how the craft operates. It focuses a single emitter and creates a gravity distortion, essentially a divot in space-time, and the craft rolls forward.